Good morning. I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. And I'm always happy that we can spend so much time together. All right, let's continue on here. All right, Piercing the Veil, a glimpse of translation by the interpreters. Anyway, Emma appears to have been one of 4 relatives by blood or by law who wrote for Joseph during the translation. After her initial scribal work, 2 of her brothers also assisted, with the scribes perhaps rotating irregularly across translation sessions. Emma's older brother, Alva Hale, evidently took up the pen to assist, though very briefly. Footnote 25. 3 evidences support Alva Hale's scribal service to Joseph Smith being brief. First, very few sources point that Alva served as a translation scribe. Second, David Whitmer, one of the only sources attributing a scribal role to Alva, says his service was brief. See Revelation Revisers. Third, although Emma's son Joseph Smith III appears to have heard that his uncle had been one of the scribes, and she acknowledged that Alva may have written some, she did not then recall him serving as a scribe. Emma Hale Smith, Bideman in Smith, last testimony. So, may have, at least briefly, people don't remember it well. And her youngest brother, Reuben Hale, did a fair amount of work as a scribe, reportedly taking dictation for Joseph on a number of occasions. Joe Smith, quote, Joe Smith would write the translation from his plates upon a slate or dictate what to write, and others would copy upon paper. His assistants were witnesses, Martin Harris and brother-in-law Reuben Hale. The translating and writing were done in the low chamber of the Joe Smith house. That's from Frederick Tree Mather. The early Mormon Joe Smith operates at Susquehanna book. You can also compare that to another Mather quote that's also in Smith's last testimony and Knight's manuscript of the history. Joseph also credited his younger brother, Samuel Smith, with providing some probably brief service as a scribe. In his earliest record, Joseph Smith reported this of the translation work before Martin Harris's scribal tenure. Now, my wife had written some for me to translate, and also my brother Samuel H. Smith. That's from Joseph Smith, history, circa the summer of 1832. So, Emma Smith, Alva, not Alvin, but Alva Hale, and Reuben Hale, and Samuel Smith, but mostly Emma in the early part before. Anyway, cool. On about April 12, 1828, according to Joseph's recollection, Martin Harris returned and began work as the principal scribe for the translating, continuing to write for Joseph until about June 14th, 1828. The footnote says, see History, 1838 to 1856, Volume A1. These dates are almost certainly not exact, and it is unclear how Joseph recalled or arrived at the specific dates of April 12th and June 14th. Likely he arrived at these dates by anchoring the beginning and ending of Martin's scribal tenure to other events for which he had recorded or well remembered the dates, as discussed further below. June 15th, 1828, was the birth and death date for Joseph and Emma's oldest child. If he recalled that Martin left shortly before the child's birth, and Joseph would have arrived at June 14th as the outside date on which Martin could have gone. Another family event, April 9th, of Emma's Uncle Reuben Hale in North Franklin, New York, about 75 miles from Harmony, could have similarly anchored the inauguration of Martin's scribal work. Joseph may have keyed his memory of Martin's first scribal work to Hale's death or funeral. And you know what's funny is that Don Bradley is doing a very good job of explaining how people's memories work. because, like, there's a lot, sequence-wise, I know happened in my life and with my family, but trying to recall, crap, was it 1 year or 1.5 years that we had done this or that? I have to go and reference something because the details of the specific dates are really hard to do. Do I remember the time period? Do I remember specific events? Do I remember specific stories? Absolutely. But do I remember the specific dates? No. It's just really hard. So we tend to organize our minds according to the events that we have. And that's what's amazing about Don Bradley is he does his darndest to reconstruct the proper time frame, not only from what the original sources say, but more importantly, from what is truly likely. Because your witnesses can say one thing, but because other people say a different thing, he can go, well, it's probably more likely this. And because of that, he's made a lot of inroads into a lot of interesting church history stuff because of that. Because he doesn't just say, well, this is my one source for what I like, and I'm going to keep it at this date. He actually goes out and finds other people who talk about the same thing. This is why Fanny Alger was one of Joseph Smith's youngest wives. They say, oh, she was 14 when she was spiritually married to Joseph Smith. And it's like, well, no, that came from one particular source who was older and said it was done during this time or before and after this. And what he doesn't get right is the fact that she couldn't have been 14 if it was during the time when he said, because he anchored it to this certain event. That would mean that she would have been a couple of years older, at least, like, I think 17, 18-ish. But it was really cool him discussing that on Ward Radio. And that's why I really appreciate his scholarly work, is that it's like he doesn't just stick to what everybody says. He goes and finds, okay, what's the reality behind it? But anyway, this is cool stuff. All right. In translating with Martin's help, Joseph used the interpreters, which apparently required a more elaborate physical setup. Simplifying Joseph's shifts from the seer stone to the interpreters and then eventually back to seer stone, Emma described him to one inquirer as having used for interpreters for the part that Martin Harris lost, Emma Smith Bidman to Emma Pilgrim on March 20th, 1870. So that was from a letter. While translating through the seer stone allowed Joseph to leave the plates wrapped up or in a distant hiding place, translating through the interpreters required the plates to be physically present and uncovered. To prevent anyone from seeing the open plates, a veil was placed between Joseph and the scribe, so that these sacred things, like the holy things of the Bible temple, could be shielded from common gaze. Footnote says, the law given in the Hebrew Bible specifies that the Ark of the Covenant and other holy things were to be veiled and carried from place to place, and that only on penalty of death, only the priests were to see them before they were covered. That's Numbers 4, chapter 4, verses 4 through 20. Fortunately, several people heard detailed descriptions of these objects from Joseph Smith, and a few reportedly also felt or saw some of the items for themselves. Joseph Smith's parents fit both categories. Joseph's mother and father saw the interpreters and the book of plates, respectively, and also heard him describe these objects immediately after he first saw them. Footnote 31. The entire Smith family handled the plates wrapped in a cloth when Joseph brought them back from the hill. Joseph Smith Sr., along with two of his sons, testified to having seen and handled them, turned the leaves of the plates, and seen the engravings on them, and as quoted in the text below, Lucy Mack Smith reported seeing and handling the interpreters through a thin muslin handkerchief. The interpreters, as described by Lucy Mack Smith in earlier chapters, were translation keys of triangular shape, three-cornered diamonds, and we have learned from Joseph's father that these interpreters lay on top of the plates of the book, which was engraved with symbols, minimally including compass and square. Footnote says, Fayette Lapham reported learning the following about the plate the interpreters rested on. On the next page, were representations of all the Masonic implements as used by Masons at the present day. Fayette Lapham, interview with Father Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet 40 years ago, his account of finding the sacred plates in Vogel. As discussed in greater detail in Chapter 1, and he said that the Masonic implements would minimally contain the two essential implements of the compass and square, without which a lodge could not be opened. As further discussed in that note, a representation of the Masonic implements as used by the Masons of that day would likely also include a book with compass and square placed on it, the pillars of Solomon's temple, an apron, the name of God, the sun, moon, and stars, and might include the beehive, the Star of David, and the Ark of the Covenant. The association of these symbols with Freemasonry would not puzzle most Latter-day Saints of the present, since these symbols are familiar from Scripture. Indeed, most of these Masonic symbols were drawn by Freemasons from the Bible. Symbols that in the 1820s evoked Freemasonry for Joseph Smith Sr. have different meanings to Latter-day Saints. To Latter-day Saints, since 1832, for instance, sun, moon, and stars are not associated with Freemasonry, nor even only with many biblical passages that mention them, but with the celestial, terrestrial, and telestial kingdoms. That's Doctrine and Covenants 76. Over this plate, with the compass and square symbols related to transparent triangles described by Joseph's mother, the interpreters. The placement of the triangular interpreters over the depictions of the compass and square is fitting, perhaps literally, and suggests another layer to the compass and square symbolism of the relics. Triangular interpreters could potentially be placed over the compass and square engravings, so as to align perfectly with them. One interpreter aligned with the compass, the other with the square. A fit between the inscribed compass and square symbols in the interpreters would not require that the symbols and the interpreters be the same size. The interpreter could be overlaid onto the corresponding symbol, at least in part, if the interpreter and symbol had the same angle. The interpreters and engravings would have aligned not by coincidence, but by design. The plates were made to go with the interpreters and to be translated with them. See Ether, chapter 3, verses 23 through 24. Compass and square symbols on the plates would have represented and provided a place for the interpreters, which would fit them as a key fits a lock. Yet, adding yet another layer to the compass and square symbolism of the interpreters is the structure of the larger device that contained them. According to Lucy Mack Smith, the triangles, or three-cornered diamonds, were set in curved frames, which connected with each other in much the same way as old-fashioned spectacles. See Anderson's Lucy's book for that quote. By Joseph Smith's day, spectacles that sat on the bridge of the nose and looped over the ears, like our familiar modern eyeglasses, were common. What Joseph's mother meant by old-fashioned has two likely candidates. The first are rivet or scissor spectacles that folded on a simple rivet and were still in use at the time, though were becoming increasingly rare. The second was the lorgnette, a simple type of spectacles held on the eyes by a handle that were still commonly used, because the interpreters were said to be connected to a rod, which could conceivably be used as a handle. A comparison to the lorgnette may seem apt. However, it was likely to the folding spectacles rather than the lorgnette that Lucy was comparing the interpreters. While old-fashioned to us, the lorgnette continued very much in vogue through the 19th century, and what Lucy had remarked as being old-fashioned about the interpreters was not that they could be attached to a handle, but how their two lens frames attached to each other. The frames of the interpreters were connected in much the same way as old-fashioned spectacles. This suggests that the spectacles lacked the solid bridge over the nose common to later spectacles and instead folded over a hinge. It was these folding spectacles that were older in style, rarer in use, and readily identified as old-fashioned. At the time Lucy used this term, if the interpreters were like rivet spectacles, they would have a hinge that, like a compass, allowed their lenses to fold in and over one another, or to fold out, allowing them to be opened to a right angle, or in builder's terms, to the square. An obvious challenge to this description of a hinged device is that gravity would tend to pull the lenses down under the hinge. Were they to hang uselessly? When attached to the rod, the device would have required a catch to hold the lenses in position in front of the eyes. In holding the lenses in place, a catch would have also given them a default position and distance from one another. The default width to which it would open would depend on how close the eyes it was intended to be used and how wide set the user's eyes were expected to be. This is where there is a picture, and I'll show it that. The description of the picture says, the interpreters modeled on Lucy Mack Smith's description resembling old-fashioned spectacles in unfolded position. The artist's rendition, courtesy of Jody Livingston, Peculiar People Illustrations. And what he had to say about this picture is that you'll notice in here, the compass and square are both at right angles. Don Bradley said it very well could be that the compass part was a little more pinched, like we're used to seeing in the Masonic symbol kind of stuff. And so that triangle would have been less of a 90-degree angle and more of an equilateral triangle. Don Bradley also notes that as he suspects that this is the way the interpreters were, that if you scissored them shut, one over the other, it could also mean that you had a non-perfect Star of David showing when the two triangles were over one another. Pretty neat, huh? All right. Dude, that part always blows my mind. Anyway. Some 19th century reports say that the lenses of the interpreters were set too wide for Joseph's eyes, making it uncomfortable for him to use them simultaneously while they rested on the rod. Joseph's father, a wearer of spectacles himself, reportedly said the interpreters were set 1.5 inches wider than the lenses of ordinary spectacles, indicating either that Joseph was not using it in the way intended by its inventor, or that the device holding the interpreters was designed for a person of extraordinary size. You can see Lapham's interview in Vogel for that quote, or source. Perhaps the most obvious default position for the device would be for the lenses to fall open to a right angle at 90 degrees. By opening 45 degrees to each side, this position would also have a familiar symbolic value, making the device a compass opened to the position of the square. The evidence provided by the prophet's parents thus suggests the interpreters embodied the compass and square on 3 levels. 1. The engravings on the plates upon which the interpreters rested. 2. The shapes of their lenses. And 3. The adjustability of their frame to form angles corresponding to both compass and square. Oh, right on the next page is exactly what I was talking about, the interpreters modeled on Lucy Mack Smith's description in a folded position, the artist's rendition of Jody Livingston again. You'll notice that in this case they have the triangles both as equilateral triangles, making the Star of David. So between the two pictures, there's a little adjustment in the shape of the lenses. As Don Bradley was pointing out, one of them could have likely been a right angle triangle and the other an equilateral triangle. So it would be close to being a symbolic but not perfect Star of David. But it's a good question of what was influenced by what. So, anyway. In addition to compass and square, the interpreters could be evoked or embody other symbols. A hinged device with triangles that fold over one another could be used to form the symbol of a star. So, for example, two equilateral triangles, lenses folded dimensionally opposite to one another, would create the Star of David. Depending on the orientation of the lenses, the use of interpreters could also evoke the symbol of the all-seeing eye, with an equilateral triangle lens or oriented with its base at the bottom during the interpreter's use. The user's eye would be framed in a triangle in precisely the way the symbol of an all-seeing eye is most often depicted, as you can see on the back of the dollar. Notably, Joseph Smith referred to his white seer stone as an all-seeing eye. You can see that from W.D. Purple's book, Joseph Smith, the Originator of Mormonism. Considering the shape and engineering of the interpreters can also extend our understanding of the sealing up of the plates and of the interpreters with the plates, as commanded by the Lord of the brother of Jared. Quote, "These two stones will I give unto thee, and ye shall seal them up also with the things which ye shall write." That's Ether 3:23. We have seen that one way the book of plates was sealed up by its final author, affixing a sacred symbol to it, a seal, while the plates requiring the adding of such a seal, the interpreters could acquire such a seal by being folded into it, as how superimposing two triangles can create a star like the Star of David, which appeared occasionally in Jewish contexts as early as the 7th century BC, often encompassed within a circle, was traditionally identified as a seal. You can see Joseph Gutman's Jewish Sanctuary for this reference. This study in section 23, Judaism, of the Iconography of Religions, produced by the Institute of Religious Iconography at the State University Groningen in Netherlands. You can see also Herbert M. Adler's book, The Jews in Southern Italy, and Gershom Sholom's book, Kabbalah. A strikingly similar image would emerge if two triangles were folded over one another in the manner of old-fashioned spectacles, rendering a star within the circle of the interpreter's rims. The interpreter's apparent capacity to be folded up into a seal seems one likely way they could be sealed up. If the interpreters were sealed up in this case, what did it mean for them to be sealed up with the plates? If compass and square engravings on top of the plate constituted a seal on the plates, and the interpreters folded together constituted a seal in themselves, then the two seals could be aligned as corresponding seals, and thus sealed up together. Such an alignment and sealing up of the interpreters with the plates would have fittingly implied that they were necessary key to the use Joseph's term. Were the necessary key to use Joseph's term, by which the plates could be sealed or unsealed, their contents revealed or hidden with God. Such a sealing of the plates using the sacred Nephite temple relics that Joseph described to his mother as a key prefigures concepts of sealing by sacred keys in a temple context that Joseph would not begin to introduce formally for a decade and a half after his recovery of the plates. Yet such concepts and language were present in fundamental ways from the time Joseph visited Cumorah to remove these sacred relics from the Nephite Ark and began to reveal their contents to the world. The breastplate and its symbolism. The connection of the interpreters and their compass and square symbolism to the breastplate also bears some exploration. Found with the interpreters in Cumorah's stone ark and designed to hold them, this breastplate clearly bore the same relationship to interpreters as the biblical high priest's breastplate did to the Urim and Thummim. The high priest's breastplate was part of a larger set of holy garments God commanded Moses to make. Quote, "And thou shalt make holy garments for Aaron thy brother, and these are garments which they shall make, a breastplate, an ephod, and a robe, and broidered coat, a mitre, and a girdle, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office." That's Exodus 28, verses 2 and verse 4. The ephod was a garment to which the breastplate attached. The mitre, a priestly headdress or cap, also called the crown, has its own parallel to the priestly treasures of Comora's ark. On the mitre's front, resting over the forehead, was an engraved gold plate with the words "Holiness to the Lord." See Exodus 28:36 through 37 and Exodus 39:30. The accompanying breastplate was to be made of fine twined linen with various colors. See Exodus 28:15. In it were set stones on which were engraved the names of the tribes of Israel, so the high priest could bear the names of the children of Israel in the breastplate of judgment upon his heart. That's verses 17, 21, and 29. Also attaching the breastplate were two stones named Urim and Thummim. That's Levi 8:8. Paralleling this biblical holy garment to which the Urim and Thummim attached, the reason I was stopping for a second, because I was thinking about the plate over the forehead saying "Holiness to the Lord," because we put the holiness to the Lord over the temple as we signify it as that. And considering that we often talk about having our own bodies be a temple to the Spirit of the Lord, especially if we are doing a priestly duty or sanctifying ourselves for that purpose, it makes total sense that the priestly garment would have that kind of holiness to the Lord stuff on it. Anyway, paralleling this biblical holy garment to which the Urim and Thummim attached was the breastplate to which the Book of Mormon interpreters attached. According to Lucy Mack Smith, it extended from the neck downward as far as the center of the stomach. Okay. Footnote says, in her memoir, Lucy wrote of the breastplate, it was concave on one side and convex on the other, and extended from the neck downward. So kind of like the breastplate itself would have been from the neck downward to as far as the center of the stomach of a man of extraordinary size. So someone who was small, like the pioneers, may have been down more to the lower part of the belly. It had 4 straps of, oh God, I keep forgetting that. There's so many really old houses in Salt Lake where the pioneers were. For them, it would be extraordinary size. For me, I'm 6'1", and Hunter is 6'5", and they would have been petite compared to Hunter. For us, it might be just normal-sized people, but for the pioneers, holy crap. I don't know how tall Joseph was or Emma was. But seeing the old clothes of the old pioneers for full-grown women, or my friend Sahala, when I was growing up, she had one of these old houses, and her front door, she had really thick walls because they had to build it, obviously very different than modern ways. I like I said, I'm 6'1", I had to duck to get through, and for them, if it was a regular open door, that would mean that the door frame would, they would probably have been in the 4 foot, 5 foot area. Yeah, interesting. Sorry. So as the center of the stomach of a man of extraordinary size, it had 4 straps of the same material for the purpose of fastening it to the breast, 2 of which ran back to go over the shoulders, and the other 2 were designed to fasten at the hips, so kind of a belt around the back and something to go over the shoulders. I don't know if it'd be straight down or crisscross, but they were just the width of 2 of my fingers, so leather straps, or a strap, I'm putting in leather, but a strap about that big, for I measured them, and they had holes in the end of them to be convenient in fastening, and you can see that in Anderson's Lucy's book. Oh, interesting. So that's the description of the breastplate. So just a big convex on this side, concave next to the skin. Wow, okay, cool. William Smith, who heard about the interpreters and breastplate from both his mother Lucy and his brother Joseph, reportedly told John W. Pearson that the interpreters connected to the breastplate via a rod attaching to the shoulder, and that the interpreters could be carried in a pocket prepared in the breastplate on the left side immediately over the heart. Oh, cool. You can see that reference from statement of J.W. Peterson concerning William Smith, May 1st, 1921. Thus, when not in use, the interpreters would sit in the left side of the chest. When connected to the rod, they would unfold a few inches apart and in front of the breastplate, likely with a compass-formed triangle lens opening to one side and a square-formed triangle lens to the other. And that's why he was saying, when he was interviewing on Ward Radio, one of the triangles was likely a right-hand square for the compass and a equilateral triangle for the compass side. In using the breastplate and interpreters, Joseph was, in effect, putting on the high priestly garments and acting in the place of the biblical high priest. The physical step required for him to use these in the translation was somewhat elaborate. Joseph prepared the room for the work of translation via the interpreters by hanging a curtain veil across the upper room of his home to veil himself and the plates from the scribe, as he would later hanging a veil in a red brick store to prepare the room for the endowment ceremonies. Footnote 40. The use of a curtain to veil spectacles and plates while these were in use is reported in 1834 and 1841 by Charles Anton, and in 1840 by John A. Clark, who describes it as a thick curtain. See Anton de How's February 17, 1834 correspondence. Anton de Coit, April 3rd, 1841. John A. Clark, letter to Dear Brethren, August 24th, 1840. Within the veiled translation space, as within the tabernacle and Solomon's temple, the sacred artifacts could be bared and used. Behind the veil, Joseph donned the breastplate and attached to it the interpreters, or as he later called them, the Urim and Thummim. Footnote 41. In his 1839 history, Joseph describes the interpreters calling them the Urim and Thummim, and indicating that they attached to the breastplate. There were 2 stones in silver bows, and these stones, fastened to a breastplate, constituted what is called the Urim and Thummim. That's Joseph Smith History 135. For the term Urim and Thummim applied to the interpreters in Joseph Smith's Revelations, see Doctrine and Covenants 17, verse 1. Early manuscripts of this revelation probably used the term interpreters, but the earliest extant version from the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants used Urim and Thummim. Richard S. Van Wagener and Stephen C. Walker argue the Nephite interpreters were not referred to as Urim and Thummim until 1833, when W. W. Phelps first equated the two in the first edition of the Evening and Morning Star. Richard S. Van Wagener and Stephen C. Walker, Joseph Smith's The Gift of Seeing. However, Brant Gardner sensibly cautions that Phelps's piece likely demonstrates only the first time the association appeared in print, noting that the term was very likely current earlier among the community, and that Phelps may have merely repeated what had become an oral convention among the Mormons. See Gardner's The Gift and Power book. There are few explicit mentions of Joseph Smith wearing the breastplate while using the interpreters. See William Smith's interview with J.W. Pearson and W.S. Pender in the statement of J.W. Pearson concerning William Smith. Bunch of resources for showing about how that all worked together and how they were referred to as Urim and Thummim, and likely that it was common orally before it was written down. Because translator and scribe were at differing levels of readiness for divine presence, they had to interact through the veil, with Joseph dictating the revealed words to Martin, and Martin recording them and repeating them to Joseph for him to confirm they were correct. See Clark, Letter to Dear Brethren. Truman Coe, reciting Martin Harris's early account of the translation by the interpreters, stated that during this process, a thick curtain or blanket was suspended between them. Joseph would look through his spectacles or transparent stones and would then repeat what he saw, which was then repeated aloud. and was written down by Harris. I'm sorry, this page is sticking. There we go. Would then repeat what he saw, which was then repeated aloud, as written down by Harris, who sat on the other side of the suspended blanket. Although Coe's repeated use of repeat is confusing, he appears to say that Joseph would dictate the words of translation he saw, upon which Martin would repeat them back to Joseph before recording them. That Joseph had his scribes verify the text with him by repeating it back is also verified by accounts from translation witnesses David Whitmer and by manuscript evidence from surviving portions of the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon by Royal Skousen. See Whitmer's An Address, Mormonism, Authentic Account of the Origin of the Sect from One of the Patriarchs, and Royal Skousen Translating the Book of Mormon, evidence from the original manuscript. All right. Only detailed description of the process of translation by the formidable interpreters comes from an 1836 letter of Kirtland, Ohio minister Truman Coe, shortly after Coe had interviewed Joseph Smith. Quote, "The manner of translation was as wonderful as the discovery. By putting his finger on one of the characters and imploring divine aid, then looking through the Urim and Thummim, he would see the import written in plain English on a screen placed before him. After delivering this to his amanuensis, I remembered from yesterday, the amanuensis, the scribe, he would again proceed in the same manner and obtain the meaning of the next character," unquote. And that's from Coe Mormonism. This account does not identify the hand that literally or figuratively wrote the words of translation on the screen placed before him. However, this identification was made elsewhere when the Book of Mormon was described by revelation to Joseph Smith as that which I have written, referring to God as the writer. Doctrine and Covenants 84:57. Fittingly, then, Joseph's own action in this divine writing process parallels that of the Lord. As Joseph touches a character on the gold plates with his finger, the Lord writes its interpretation upon the veil with his finger. Coe's recital of the prophet's translation account is also significant in its mechanical details about the functioning of the interpreters, which, as reported, produced a visual effect similar to that of a slide projector or a 19th century slide lantern, a small image that would appear on the lenses. The source for that is an obituary for David Whitmer reported that when Smith would put on the spectacles, a few words of the text of the Book of Mormon would appear on the lenses. Combining the details provided by Whitmer and Co., we arrive at images being projected via the lenses onto the veil. See the Last Witness Dead. Okay. Was projected, so the small image that would appear on the lenses was projected in a much larger form onto the screen or veil in front of him. This fulfilled quite literally the Lord's prophecy to the brother of Jared about the interpreters. I will cause in my own due time that these stones shall magnify to the eyes of men these things which ye shall write. That's Ether 3:24. The slide lantern, or magic lantern, was an early type of image projector invented in the mid-17th century. Significantly, the lenses of the interpreters may have been convex on both sides, like those of a magnifying glass. So bulged out like the magnifying glass. In 1859, Martin Harris reportedly described them as thicker in the center, but not so thick at the edges. Francis Gladden Bishop, an address to the sun. You can see that from Francis Gladden Bishop's An Address to the Sons and Daughters of Zion, scattered abroad throughout all the earth, and Mormonism, volume number 2. Oh, interesting. So they were probably magnifiers in a way, too. See, all the details you don't get because everyone focuses on the kind of more important spiritual stuff, but still cool. The interpreters would have projected images onto the screen most visibly when outside light was excluded. Indeed, the defining function of a screen in Joseph's day was not to provide a surface for the projection of images, but to screen out external light. A screen, as defined by Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, was anything that separates or cuts off inconvenience, injury, or danger, and hence that which shelters or protects from danger or prevents inconvenience. Thus, a screen is used to intercept the light, to intercept the heat of fire or light of a candle. In this, it was equivalent to a veil, whose function was also to separate a cover, a curtain, something to intercept the view and hide an object. Both could be employed to intercept the sight or view. See Noah Webster's American Dictionary of the English Language, screen and veil. The screen placed before him during the process of translation by the interpreters was thus not just an internal movie screen in Joseph's mind, it was a physical obstruction, the veil or blanket that needed to be hung in front of him to screen out interfering light. Footnote says Coe's reference to a screen placed before Joseph is comparable to Anton's curtain before him. Joseph translated on the reports conveyed by Pomeroy Tucker behind a blanket screen drawn across a dark corner of a room to screen out physical light. You can see that as Pomeroy Tucker's Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism. Joseph translated on the reports, the blanket or veil in front of Smith thus functioned both like the doors of a darkened movie theater, blocking out, distracting, and interfering light, and as the movie screen into which the images were projected. The full visual and emotional effect of this process, if imagined, is striking. Equilateral triangle and right triangle lenses project their light onto the veil. An incandescent light appears one by one against the blackness, as if written by an unseen hand, another manifestation of the light which shineth in the darkness. And footnote for that, the writing of God's finger on this veil might fruitfully be compared to writing on the wall of the temple by the finger of God in the Nephite story of Aminadai. See Alma, chapter 10, verse 2. And his chapter 13 later in this book. And it also reminds me of the finger writing on the wall is in the Old Testament when Daniel is King, what's his name, Zedekiah? But it's also the same king where he's been measured, weighed, and found wanting. But that's where you get the finger of God on there, and other references we might be familiar with. The curtains or veils behind which Joseph translated via the interpreters thus appear to have had several functions, shielding the sacred objects from the outside gaze, facilitating Joseph's perception of the subtle spiritual light by reducing natural light, providing a screen or canvas onto which the words written in this light could be projected and magnified, and marking off sacred space in which Joseph could use the breastplate and interpreters. Yet in making a boundary between sacred space and ordinary space, the veil did a more than separate. A boundary is not only a marker of separation, but also a point of contact. The veil between sacred and profane, higher and lower, provide the point of contact between Martin and Joseph, and between Joseph and the Lord. Through the veil, the spiritual veil symbolized by the physical curtain, Joseph communicated with the Lord. Wearing the breastplate and consulting the interpreters, Joseph would touch with his finger each of the engravings, the mysterious alphabetic characters, the crosses and flourishes, the esoteric implements. And the Lord wrote by his own hand each symbol onto the veil. The Lord then unfolded the symbol's meaning in writing it also on the veil. The very veil that divided higher and lower also provided a place for conveying knowledge from higher to lower. Boundaries of sacred space had been similarly marked off with cloth in the ancient biblical tabernacle and Solomon's temple, where a veil was hung before the Holy of Holies, in which the high priest, wearing the breastplate and Urim and Thummim, approached the Ark of the Covenant on the Day of Atonement to perform his most sacred responsibilities. As a translator, Joseph Smith, secluded behind a veil like that concealing the ark, wearing a breastplate like that of the Jewish high priest, and consulting two stones that parallel the stones of the biblical Urim and Thummim, took on the high priest's meditatory role as revelator, consulting God on behalf of others through instruments and sacred space consecrated to that purpose. In this way, the translation space acted as a makeshift tabernacle. Joseph would again construct such a sacred space in the 1830s by building an actual temple in Kirtland, Ohio, where he would introduce ordinances of washing and anointing, and where behind a drawn veil he and Oliver Cowdery would enter the Lord's presence. He would construct another sacred edifice in the 1840s when he built the Nauvoo Temple, with its still more profound and sweeping sacred rituals. But the first temple space Joseph Smith constructed was where he translated the lost book in the upper room of his house, the space demarcated by a hanging veil and hallowed by God's presence manifest in his hand reaching out to write on the veil. Ta-da! The next is chapter 4, the manuscript theft. Okay, things I learned from this chapter that were really amazing was I finally understood what they mean by the breastplate and the description of it, because I always heard the kind of concave convex thing, and to me, I always imagined some sort of like thing coming out to hold the spectacles from the chest because of how it was described weirdly. To me, it seems like it is just a straight up breastplate from the neck down to where the belly would be, that I had the straps, 2 straps on the shoulders and then around the hip, and well, or near where the hip would be because it goes down to the belly. A pocket, that's interesting. I expect some sort of hole or something to hold the spectacles, like, and that's just way cool in so many ways. I had no idea that it functioned like, here he is pointing on the plates. I wonder if it would kind of reflect from one to the other for that projection kind of idea. Or I wonder, that's just way cool. Never knew that whole part. And it's just really amazing to me. I'm fascinated with, there's one other thing that's really, 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 really cool that goes along with all this. Despite all the cool specific details that come from additional study, the most important thing to me is the fact that it exists. On Word Radio, there's a guy who is the husband of one of the ladies that appear on there, because they like have the guys group, and then they have the ladies of Word Radio. Well, one of the ladies of Word Radio, their husband went through a faith crisis for quite some time, and he basically was thinking of leaving the church because he had listened to the CES letter and the Mormon Stories podcast, which is kind of done by a guy who, it's kind of anti-Mormon-y, but it's called Mormon Stories. And so he was thinking of leaving the church, and she had said to him, look, if you can find more light and truth anywhere else, I will follow you. And so then he really started digging deep into how things worked and church history, and he realized that all this anti-Mormon stuff that he was listening to was really bunk. It was really crap, because he figured out the methods and ways things were used to manipulate people. And he decided that after he came to the conclusion that, no, it's important to believe, he's like, look, for himself, he said, I may not have all the answers, and some things may not make sense to me, but I can tell you this, through everything that I've learned, all the answers to, the church and answers to the critics, the church is what I'm going to believe in, period. Do I know? No, I can't know, because I don't have all facts, but I will believe, and I know that it's been extremely helpful in my life and that kind of stuff. He wrote a answer to the CES letter called the Light and Truth letter, because if you don't know anything about the CES letter, probably about 5 to 10 years back, there was a guy who became an anti-Mormon. He started writing on all these subreddits and things like that. And in an effort to try and help him, his bishop said, hey, I have this friend who works in the church education system, CES, and maybe he can help answer your questions. And so what he did is he got together all his copy and paste arguments against the church and put it together in this script to try and give to this guy. And the story is that, oh, this is really what was bothering me. And I really wanted to have real answers. And the CES guy, well, no, he couldn't answer it. And you see, this is why I'm not part of the church anymore. But the fact of the matter is that he actually was not honestly searching for answers. And more importantly, the story that he gave of, I was just honestly seeking answers, and I wanted this to be, really looked at, is what caught people's attention. Because what he has in there is a bunch of old recycled tropes that he got from circling the drain of Reddit and Discord among these anti-Mormons and sticking it together. And the Light and Truth letter goes through and explains all this and gives receipts of, here's these posts that show that this was not done in good faith, that this was not an honest person trying to seek answers. And if he was seeking honest answers like I was, here's the things that could have helped better. And it's really, really cool because the Light and Truth letter goes through and it starts with, here's how they try and manipulate you. And it's all very short things. It's like, this is what a straw man is. This is them trying to say, oh, we think of our prophets as perfect when that's not the truth. And, all this other stuff. And he shows how they try and set something up so they can knock it down, or that they are just trying to gish gallop, which is a new word I learned, which is just, you just spew forth all the crap all at once of objection after objection, even if they all have answers that are all very good. Grouping them together, especially if they're weak, and throwing them out all at once is like, oh, well, you must have something good to, you have to have some real big, that must be a really good point because there's so many. No. What it is it's just trying to overrun you. And so Light and Truth letter, it's not very long. I got through it in, I could probably get through it in 2 hours, 3 hours. But it is amazing with how it shows. Well, I know I've been focusing on the manipulation, but what it mostly does is it mostly says, okay, now that you know what kind of tools they're trying to use against you, here are the answers to what's behind the animus. Because critics of the church are no longer going, well, the church is just wrong, and this is stupid, and Joseph Smith interpreting things as stupid, and this is silly, to now, the church is wrong and bad for you. They're saying that the church is bad, and you're bad for believing in it. And it comes down to because of the attack morally against people, because it's like, well, you don't support the LGBTQ community, and they're killing themselves, and it's all your fault because of it. And it's like, whoa, no, it's really not. And so many church members are like, oh, we need to be better understanding. He's like, no. You have to understand that's not only wrong, and it's an absolute lie. The church does more for its members than almost any other institution and other things. And he goes through and provides the numbers and studies. It's amazing. The Light and Truth letter focuses on, look, here are their criticisms. Here's what they bring up. But here's the reality behind it. Okay? Let's talk about LGBTQ matters. Members of the church who identify in those groups do better and have less, they off themselves less. They have better lives. They're more successful just by being in the church, even if they self-identify in that group. And, oh, what about, Joseph Smith and his interpretation? Well, here's the fact. We have the Book of Mormon. We have it. I don't care if he stood on his head to interpret it. The idea is that we got this book in such a short amount of time with so much complexity. And not only that, all these things that people are saying are anachronism. That doesn't belong in there. That was something that he probably knew then. It's like the only way they come to try and describe how did the Book of Mormon get here is through something that is so convoluted. You're like, is it easier to actually accept the idea that God did this through his gift and power by whatever means that may be, or believe that he had access to all sorts of esoteric knowledge, scripts, manuals, maps, just all at once in writing this in a very short period of time. And then that's really where it came from, when all these other sources where this material was supposed to come from weren't available to him. It strains credulity. So the reason I'm bringing this up is read the Light and Truth letter. It's really, really cool, and it's done really, really well. And it's not combative. It's very much like, here's what they try to do, here's the actual answer, here's these criticisms, here's the reality. And he also turns the question around. He basically says, instead of us sitting there going, well, I get where you're coming from, and I understand, and maybe I should look better, he goes, wait a minute, whoa, time out. You're asking a question in this manner. Are you saying that you really think that the naturalistic explanation for the Book of Mormon is that Joseph Smith was this super awesome con man who had access to all these manuscripts and it didn't come from him, or that he was a great storyteller and made it all up, but yet there's all these other evidences that we have all this stuff that counteracts their arguments? But when you flip the question over to them, it's like, wait, if you have problems with the Book of Mormon just actually existing, your natural explanation is just kind of backward engineering, and not good backward engineering. It makes it much more easy to see that this really is miraculous that he got it out the way he did, and so correct in so many ways, and all the evidence is for it. Is it 100% perfect? Well, see, no, it's not, or there might be stuff that we don't know about still, but I'm like, they go over the idea that all these anachronisms that they thought, like horses in the New World, they recently found horses in the New World in the fossil record. They, or these alliterations and other things like that. They had this list of like 150 anachronisms. A majority of them are proven to be correct and right. And normally if you have some sort of hoax, it gets worse over time. The Book of Mormon gets better over time as we learn more and find more scripts and texts and information, and that back up the idea that them talking about Jesus Christ before Jesus Christ came was not an anachronism, that it was there, or all this other stuff. It's all in there. It's way, way, way cool. So the Light and Truth letter is not very long. If you just spend, some time just like this, you get it done easy. And it's just, to me, it's very uplifting, because it shows, no, your criticisms of the church fall flat. Here's why. We have all these evidences, and more importantly, if you just flip the question around, you can see that they're just trying to poke at you and stab you and try and destroy your faith, because their own explanation of this is far worse than the actual explanation that is given by Joseph and God and his witnesses and everything like that. It just becomes very blatantly clear that all they're trying to do is destroy, because they don't have an explanation that's better. So they'll criticize. But the more that I learn, the more that I go, it is so true in so many ways. And even if we may not have a perfect knowledge, because we weren't there to witness it our physical selves, it's like, it brings up really good points. You take the whole, you take all this specific learning, and you take the whole look at it, and you see that most importantly, it makes people's lives better. It gives them the courage to become better people, to trust in other people and have more faith in them courageously, even though we all know deep down inside we have a bag of snakes. We can courageously love one another, courageously trust one another, and believe in the betterment of one another. And as that trust is exceeded and reciprocated, we can build a more Zion-like people, a people that really is more coming to the Lord. Anyways, love you lots. Have a great day. We'll see you.